of a personal question, I know, but I've been wondering, are you AFAB or AMAB?
Bro, I am literally just hotter than you.
Yo, according to this box of mac and cheese I just scarfed down, I'm a family of 4.
If you're at all interested in conversations around gender, you've probably come across the terms AFAB and AMAB quite a lot. Today, I'm going to break down the origin of these terms, what they mean, alternatives to these terms, and more importantly, whether these terms contribute something positive or negative or both to our existing understanding of gender and sex. The state of nature is drawn by each theorist in a manner that enables him to reach the desired solution, the political solution he has already formulated. These are the words of Carol Pateman in her book entitled The Sexual Contract, where she notes that obsession around biological categorizations tied to nature are often exploited in favor of political agendas. Those agendas are used to oppress others on the basis of race, gender, sexuality, and other categories. It's ironic, though, because even while having this awareness, she then proceeds to say that trans women are not women on the basis of nature and biology, and that trans women should be excluded from the kind of rights and feminism that she pursues for real women. You see, we can have all the righteous self-awareness that biological categorizations have the potential to be incredibly dangerous and fulfill nefarious political agendas, while using similar biological categorizations to oppress ourselves and others, often without even realizing it. According to Claudia Johnson, a relationship, intimacy, and sex therapist, the terms AMAB and AFAB originated from the term Caemawr, which stands for coercively assigned male at birth. The term Caemawr was actually created by trans women as an alternative to male to female. A lot of trans women felt like male to female was kind of an offensive term. It implied that they chose to be men and then they suddenly woke up one day and decided to be women, whereas a lot of trans women feel that they have always been women and that they were incorrectly assigned male at birth. Now, this term started to be used by the intersex community, who were really excited by it. Intersex people, if you don't know, are neither male nor female in terms of their factual, empirical, biological sex. TERFs. Eventually, the terms AFAB and AMAB became widely used in gender-aware circles, with AFAB meaning assigned female at birth and AMAB meaning assigned male at birth. These terms provide a politically correct way to describe the sex origin and transition path of, generally, those who are diverging from traditional gender binary in some way. It's also commonly used in discussions around non-binary identity. Being non-binary or not identifying as male or female is just not enough. We need to know which one you really are. Oh, I love non-binary people. Have you ever noticed that non-binary people are literally the hottest people you've ever seen in your entire life? Actually, one of my best friends, Rue, Erskine, and Lily the third, is non-binary, and they are so hot. Okay, yeah, but is he AMAB or AFAB? Are they AMAB or AFAB? I'm just curious. It doesn't matter which one. Or both, or neither. Asking if a non-binary person is AMAB or AFAB is kind of this way of understanding which kind of non-binary person they are. We don't like erasing sex from our understanding of other people because it's so deeply ingrained in our experience of the world. But the terms AMAB and AFAB have their limitations. Even though they originally became prominently used in intersex circles, they've now become shorthand for binary sex categories. And the problem with that is that, well, firstly, sex isn't binary. The other failing of these terms is the reality that sex is changeable.
I have not been growing a tiny penis for the past 2 years just to call myself AFAB.
This video isn't here to debate that particular point. If you're not with me on that one, I encourage you to watch my video entitled Sex Critical, where I debunk common positions that sex is a binary, unchangeable entity. But anyway, if my sex started as male but has changed to female or something in between, then why does my assigned sex at birth matter to anybody unless it's a part of my journey as a human being that I'm desperate to share with the world? Not everybody wants to unveil their starting point when it comes to sex, especially when AFAB and AMAB are so often understood as current sex categories. If I say I'm AMAB, it's often assumed that my sex is currently male, not taking into account the possibility that my sex could have changed. The moment someone's sex at birth is known, it replaces the existing understanding of gender and sex for that person, or at least it becomes a modifier on top of someone's existing identity. They can't simply be non-binary or trans, they need to be non-binary AMAB or trans AFAB for us to understand them entirely. So for those who are non-binary, they've escaped the gender binary only to be placed into another gendered, sex-based binary category. And for those of us who have or are changing our sex, these categorizations have the potential to seem a little bit belittling. Like, sure, you're female now, but lest we forget that you were assigned male at birth. Now, there are some alternative terms out there to understand an individual's sex journey in relation to gender identity. I recently came across the terms TMA and TME. And while they also have some problems, I think that they offer something interesting to the conversation, so we're going to talk about them. TMA refers to transmisogyny affected, and TME refers to transmisogyny exempt. Transmisogyny is a term that was coined by Julia Serrano in her 2007 book Whipping Girl to describe a particular form of oppression experienced by trans women, combining misogyny with transphobia. The purpose of these identifiers is to leave a biological category for a social one. But these terms, like AFAB and AMAB, have some slight issues as well. Although trans femmes struggle with unique forms of oppression and challenges related to transition, the term TME for AFAB individuals implies that AFAB individuals don't suffer from transphobia and misogyny, which just isn't true. I do really like that TME and TMA part ways with biological nature-based language to instead describe cultural and social experiences, but I don't think that they're a perfect solution for the terms AMAB or AFAB either. I still have this underlying question, which is, why are we so obsessed with sex categories and the language that we use to describe them? What value are these terms adding to our existing understanding of language and gender and sex? And I think that these are complex questions, which frankly, I don't entirely have the answer to. But since this is the Quinn Birkholz YouTube channel, we are sure as heck gonna try to answer them anyway. Quick disclaimer, between part 1 and part 2 of this video, I got about 2 hours of sleep, so if part 2 is a little bit more unhinged, that is why. Anyway, let's continue talking about sex at birth. That sounds weird. I probably should have thought about that title more. If you've watched my content before, or even just in watching this video, you'd probably get the idea that I'm not overly fond of biological categorizations, and you would be absolutely right in thinking that. But contrary to what a lot of TERFs or generally transphobic people believe, I and most trans people I know do indeed recognize scientific biological reality. And I think recognizing sex and biology is important, up until a point. For example, when we navigate the medical system, we need to recognize different medical needs of different bodies. If you have a uterus and it's possible you could get pregnant based on sexual activity, then that's useful information for your doctor to know. If you're at higher risk for prostate cancer because, well, you have a prostate, then again, that's useful information from a medical perspective. Now, from a physical bioessentialist standpoint, in my personal opinion, that is where the value of sex categories ends. In pretty much any other scenario, you don't need to know what my sex is unless you're dating me. But from a cultural perspective, there are other arguments which could be made in favor of understanding assigned gender at birth categories, which are heavily linked with sex. Whether you're AFAB or AMAB shouldn't impact what shower gel you buy, what perfumes and clothes are available to you, and what bathroom you choose to piss in. But it can tell us other useful things about ourselves and society, such as examining male privilege as a factor which can cause AMAB people at times and under certain, well, privileged circumstances to have, say, slightly higher levels of confidence in pursuing traditionally male-dominated careers, whereas someone who's AFAB may have been influenced by oppressive patriarchal structures their entire life, and might not have that same level of confidence. Now, that particular subject is a lot more nuanced than I have time to explore here. I think that male privilege for trans femme individuals is kind of something that only sort of happens when you are socialized as a feminine boy for most of your life. You're not treated well. There's not a lot about that is very privilege inducing, but I digress. From a transition perspective, I do think it's really valuable to talk about the way that those assigned male at birth, transitioning in a feminine direction, are treated very differently in society than those who are assigned female at birth, transitioning in a masculine direction. For one thing, from a sex perspective, AMAB people have a slightly harder transition path. Because bone that has already been developed can't be undeveloped without surgery, AMAB people often choose to undergo surgeries to shave down their bone to so-called female levels, whilst AFAB people can just grow new bone through the process of hormone replacement therapy. AMAB people also don't have their voices changed through the process of hormone replacement therapy, and voices are a strong sex signifier which can make transition really difficult for AMAB individuals, whereas AFAB folks have their voices lowered automatically through the process of HRT. Additionally, AFAB people who adopt androgynous aesthetics are often perceived as male by society already, and regularly get misgendered and yes, even harassed in women's bathrooms and that sort of thing already, without even necessarily transitioning. AFAB people who transition in a masculine direction are often seen as basically naive, vulnerable women who have gotten confused and ruined their femininity, but they're ultimately seen as victims of trans ideology, whereas AMAB trans femmes are often seen as violent perpetrators of patriarchy, who are using the weapon of transness to co-opt womanhood and generate a mass hysteria where sex and biology isn't recognized and they can get away with heinous acts in women's bathrooms, like, taking a piss in an enclosed private cubicle. And because trans femmes in particular have such a difficult time with passing pre-surgery, sometimes we're in the awkward position where we are perceived as men still by everybody around us, whilst our AFAB trans siblings are more swiftly able to develop strong sex signifiers like beards, and then they're able to stealth, and so the trans discourse gets largely situated around, frankly, the ugliness of men in dresses, rather than, the smoking hotness of the absolute studs that trans men are. Okay, but seriously, not to get all incel on you, but I genuinely do think ugliness is relevant to the conversation here. Masculine features in feminine people, while it can be fetishized, are generally seen by most of society as a very ugly thing. And trans femmes who are already dealing with the pain of societal ostracization, economic costs associated with surgery, support me on Patreon, please, and difficulty passing, might also be dealing with the difficult position of being treated as ugly by society, which, believe it or not, originates a lot of trans femme-related hate. Feminine features on men, on the other hand, are often fetishized and seen as attractive and beautiful, which can absolutely have its own challenges, but ultimately society handles these two transition paths very differently. From an economic perspective, a study in the workplace found that trans women, after they transition, on average lose almost 1/3 of their salary, are respected less, and receive more harassment. And at the same time, trans men, after they transition, experience salary raises and greater authority in the workplace. Additionally, over half of all anti-LGBTQIA+ homicides are perpetuated against transgender women, which is kind of insane. That's why Julia Serrano chose to coin the term transmisogyny, because what trans femmes experience isn't just transphobia, it's transphobia and misogyny intertwined into its own particularly horrible beast. And while terms like transmisogyny affected and transmisogyny exempt are dysfunctional because both AFAB and AMAB people experience transmisogyny, they do strike a point, which is that a lot of contemporary trans discourse is centered around AMAB people's bodies and experiences, and a lot of transphobia, especially the violent murderous kind, is, well, targeted at us as well. I just want to stress that this isn't the Trauma Olympics. I'm not saying like, ooh, look at us trans femmes have it so much worse, woe is me. And generally speaking, I don't really think it's useful to like compare hierarchies of oppression. I think that all trans people are equally deserving to have rights and to be fought for and to be seen. And yeah, this is not the Trauma Olympics. I literally made a whole video on why the Trauma Olympics, especially in the queer community, is very silly. But there are differences in how various sex categories and transition paths are treated socially and culturally, and I think recognizing those differences is okay. It's interesting, and I think it's useful to the overall conversation on gender and sex and how gender and sexes are treated differently. But since I have focused a lot on the struggles of trans femme individuals, I do want to briefly bring up drag. Drag is a space where AFAB people are almost always treated worse. Drag is currently very much a cis male dominated art form, and AFAB performers often really struggle to get the same amount of recognition and monetary compensation and just bookings and basically exposure and everything that their cis male peers get a lot more easily when it comes to the drag art form. For AFAB drag performers specifically, I often find that they are described as AFAB, like, ooh, look at this AFAB drag queen. But you would never see a drag queen described as AMAB. Oh, come check out this AMAB drag performer. Like, that just wouldn't happen. Ultimately, I don't think that your sex is relevant to whether or not you are a good performer. Anyway, I want to bring all of this back to the current politically correct realm of AFAB and AMAB usage. I know myself and a lot of other trans folks know the classic moment where you look at an event and it's labeled as for women and non-binary folks. And there's no real admission here, but there's a heavy implication that these events are just for women and people that ultimately everyone just sees as women anyway. Like, basically, this is for AFAB people and AFAB people only. La 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 la. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba-ba. Here we go again. Having these sex-based categories strips away the complexity of socio-cultural life development. Maybe there's an event for feminine individuals who want to celebrate their femininity and challenge toxic masculinity. But within that group could include plenty of cis people, non-binary people, women, gay men, bisexual men, straight people. Back when I once identified as a cis man, I often felt I related much more to feminine people talking about feminine experiences, especially women. And in retrospect, there were maybe some tells that I was missing there. But at the same time, I know cis folks who would strongly relate to that, yet aren't trans. And just to be very, very clear, because I know I'm going to get folks saying that having specific spaces for specific groups for solidarity, support, and all that is really important, and I don't disagree with that at all. I even understand the desire for sex-exclusive spaces as long as they're also trans-inclusive and not just AFAB, AMAB based. I just think in general, in the politically correct, liberal, capitalist world, we've taken a lot of silly, oppressive, sex-based ideas, switched the wording around, and then carried on, without examining how hyper-analyzed and policed sex categories can be really harmful and dysfunctional in how we navigate the human experience. I think that this video is kind of more of a think piece than anything. Like, obviously I'm not overly fond of the terms AFAB and AMAB, and I think that society's a little bit too obsessed with sex categories, even in left-wing, super trans-inclusive spaces, but I do recognize their uses, and this shit's weird and complicated, and I don't have some absolute wisdom or truth on the subject. I think what I want to just say is that, like, think about how you're using these terms, whether they're really the right language to use, whether they even matter at all, and how we can potentially better account for human experience beyond these very biological categories. Alrighty, that's all for this one, folks. As always, if you want to do those lovely things that YouTubers always ask you to do, like liking and commenting and sharing and subscribing, that would be nice, but what would be even more nice is if you were able to throw a couple bucks at me over on Patreon, because that helps a lot with the continuation of my creative work. And you could see me in my next video, or maybe you could see me on one of my streams, because those happen every single week. There's a link to that down below and on the screen right now. And those are kind of like this right now, where I just hang out at my desk, sit in my big fancy chair, which is not actually mine, but is in fact my flatmate's fancy League of Legends chair, and we hang out and play video games and chat and do makeup, and it's fun. So feel free to do that as well. And yeah, I will see you in the next one. À la prochaine! To these wonderful people. These people right here, they are freaking great.